The next data type or variable type is tuple. So what is a tuple? It is similar to list, like an array, but you cannot modify any elements inside of the tuple. Like we did in case of list, so we updated one element, we removed elements, we added elements. We cannot do that with tuple. The representation is a little different. We do not use square bracket for tuples. We use this first bracket. So let's say there's a variable name respected person, Dr. Abdul Kalam, and then you have the date of birth and profession as scientist. So now this is a tuple, and when do we use tuple? Similar to situations like this, when we do not want to modify anything of or any values inside of the variable, because the name Dr. Abdul Kalam will never change, the date of birth will never change, and neither the scientist. This is how we define a tuple. Now if you have to initialize, of course you can initialize like tuple bracket, but do you need this? Because we cannot add or modify elements, so it does not make any sense to create an empty tuple. Wow, what is the point of having an empty tuple wherein we cannot make any modifications to it? And as usual, these are the operations that you can do. We can use index to get individual elements. We can get the count. We can also search a particular value inside of a tuple. Now I told you that we cannot modify any elements inside of a tuple, but if we have list as one of the elements inside of a tuple, we can modify that. For example, let's say I have this tuple, my tuple 1, 2, 3, and the fourth element is a list. So we can modify the elements 4 and 5 inside of this list. That is possible. So let's say I want to change the value from 4 to 40. We can do that. So my tuple fourth element and the first element of the fourth element, which is a list. If we want to list all the elements in a tuple, we use the for loop just like we did in list. So that's most of the operations in a tuple. But what will I do is that let me go ahead and do some hands-on. So this is the tuple respected person, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He was born in 15th October 1931 and he was a scientist. Now if I type this particular variable, it will show me all the values in it. And let's say I want to create a new person with an empty tuple, I can do that. But it does not make sense because we cannot add anything. Now if I want to get individual elements, I can do that. Let's say the first element, which is doctor, the second element is APJ, and let's say I want to get the date of birth, that is the fifth element, and maybe the profession which he was in is the sixth element. So we can get that. We can also find out the number of occurrences of a particular value in the entire tuple. So there's only one occurrence of this particular value, which is APJ. And also let's say we want to find out at which offset this particular value is. The offset is also 1, which is actually the second element. Now if I type Abdul, then the offset is 2, which says that this particular word is there in the third element. Now as I said that there's no operation that we can do on tuple. We cannot do any addition, we cannot do any modification, etc. in a tuple. But we can modify a tuple with a list element in it. So let's say I had this particular tuple, and if you see, the fourth element is a list, and I'm mentioning AWS and GCP here. Now if I type, of course, these are the elements and I can get the individual elements. So this is the first element and this is the fourth element, which is a list. I can get the first sub element in the fourth element, which is AWS, and the second element is GCP. Now what you can do, I can update this. So let's say instead of GCP, I mention Azure. That is possible. Now if I type here, the first element has been changed to Azure. So if you see now, we have 1, 2, 3 AWS and Azure. But similarly, let me try to modify the first element. So instead of 1, I'll mention, let's say 100. And it gives error. The error is a type error. Tuple object does not support item assignment. So which means that we cannot change an item. Now let's say I want to change the entire list. So instead of AWS and GCP, let me mention Python and Java. And it will also give you error that it does not support item assignment. Now, why it gave error? Because this is the entire item in the tuple. I cannot modify the entire item. But if the item is a list, I can modify individual items in the list. So again, this is not the purpose of a tuple. Purpose of tuple is to hold objects that you do not want to change, or you do not want your program to modify the elements or the values of the elements in a tuple. So that is the purpose of having a tuple data type or a tuple variable. Now if I have to list all the elements in tuple, so I'll type like this: for I in respected person, print I. Again, don't worry about the for loop because we'll talk about it later on. As you can see, it is printing all the elements inside the tuple: Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the date of birth, and then the occupation, which was scientist. So this is how we can print all the elements in a tuple also.